Good morning and greetings. Today I'm going to explore, I would like us to explore together the topic of consciousness, and within consciousness a very interesting aspect of the way our mind works, the way our brain works, that really makes us understand the importance of that question of whether we're living our life on the foundation of fear or on the foundation of love. We all know that many things that are happening in our life have their origin in the way we think, in the way we imagine life, in emotions inside our heart. And we know that consciousness is a creative tool. It's a creative instrument that nature, life has developed in us through, according to science, a very long process of evolution that's been through mineral and vegetal and animal, and then human with that ability to think, to imagine with a mind. And that consciousness, that mind, is both our greatest gift, but it's also our curse, because most of us don't know how to handle that mind, that consciousness. It's like you have an extraordinarily powerful instrument, but there's no usual manual to use it. So tonight I would like to explore briefly two aspects. The first one is what are the four main functions of consciousness, and why? Why we have a mind, why we have an ability to think, to imagine things that do not exist yet. Again, if we trust the model that science is giving us, then we see that consciousness has evolved first for our own survival. And by this, I mean one of the very fundamental functions of consciousness is the ability to sense and to make decisions, to respond to what we are sensing. Plants do that, I believe stones do that, and animals definitely do that, and we do this constantly. We are sensing and we make responses on the basis of what our senses inform us about the opportunities and the dangers, the threats that are in our environment. And that first aspect of consciousness is what we call the reptilian brain. And the reptilian brain is at the back of our heads, at the top of the spine, just at the base of the skull behind. And it's called the reptilian brain because, by the way, we've got three brains. We've been told at school that we have a brain, it's a fantastic thing, but there are actually three brains inside our head, like three independent little or big computers that are working in sync. And the first one is the reptilian brain, that is designed, whose function is to guarantee our survival. And the reptilian brain works in a very simple way. It works in reflex. There's no thinking, there's no planning, there's no imagination, there's no recalling, there's no memorizing, but there is only the perception of an opportunity or a threat and an immediate instinctive response. The power of the reptilian brain is that it is something that really puts us on alert. It's the power of a kung fu fighter, of a warrior, which means a very high level of alertness. It's a full involvement of our inner resource for fast action. And the reptilian brain does three things, more or less. It grabs. When you perceive an opportunity, there is a movement in your consciousness that grabs that thing, that says, I want that and I'm going to get it. And the second thing the reptilian brain is doing, it responds to threats. And here it either runs away or attacks, becomes aggressive. And this is known as the fight or flight response, which is another word for something we all know in our modern lives, which is called stress. The mechanism of stress is quite dramatic when you look at what's happening inside the physical body when you're under stress. The moment the reptilian brain perceives a threat or an opportunity, it's going to put the whole system on alert, which means that all the muscles become tense for fast action. Everything is designed for a very quick response, very intense response, and very fast response. And so muscle become tense, the blood pressure is rising, heart is pumping blood all over the system to make us very active. We very actively digest any remaining food in the stomach, means acid is poured in the stomach to very quickly transform food into energy, release sugar into the blood, again for very fast action and high level of alertness. The breath becomes fast and becomes shallow. The mechanism of the reptilian brain is a mechanism that saves your life when you meet a tiger in your bathroom at 3 o'clock in the morning. And here it's a very good thing to have a reptilian brain and to have that kind of instinctive reflex. But every time you worry about not being able to pay the next bill, or where is your next customer gonna come, or what is your spouse or your boyfriend, girlfriend doing, you are creating exactly the same response inside, called the stress response. So this is the first part of our consciousness, focused on survival and handled by the reptilian brain, which is making us operate on instinct. Very fast reaction, very effective reaction in inverted coma, as we are going to see in the next few moments. The second part of consciousness that nature, life has evolved, is something that probably plants have, but animals definitely, mammals definitely have that, the ability to bond, the ability to create emotional bonds, bonds of loyalty, of togetherness, of inclusion, and of care. And you see that in many animals, and of course you see that in humans. And that second part of consciousness, that second function of consciousness, is handled by what we call the emotional brain. And the emotional brain is situated right at the center of our head, right at the core of the brain, above the reptilian brain. So you've got the reptilian spine, reptilian brain, and then the emotional brain on top of that. It's a center. And it is a very interesting part of the brain, because usually when we talk about brain, we talk about abstract things like thoughts, knowledge, memory, reason, logic. But the emotional brain is the part of the brain that understands the language of feelings. It reads feeling, it stores emotional memories, and it is involved into all the mechanisms of balance and good health and long-term memory inside our system. I call it the heart of the brain, because the brain is a heart. So these are our two first aspects of consciousness: survival, instinct, and bonding, togetherness, loyalty, and care. The two higher, in inverted comma, higher aspects of consciousness are imagination and self-awareness. And this is very unique to us human beings. I believe animals' dreams. I believe our dogs and cats can dream things, they can imagine things, they translate sensations into mental images. But we human beings do that in a very conscious way, in a very broad way, and in a very powerful way. The ability of imagination is a very misunderstood ability. For most people it means to dream, but the ability to imagine, the function of imagination, is involved into learning. When we learn something new, we learn something that our senses do not perceive. We learn something that we've never seen in our life. And it is with the power of our imagination that we figure out that thing, that we start to see it, that we observe it, that we analyze it, that we start to understand it. So imagination is directly involved into learning. Imagination, of course, is involved into organizing information. When you process vast amount of data and you organize that into your head, into a system, imagination is immediately involved into recalling memories, Every time we go back into our past, the past doesn't exist anymore. So we are using the power of imagination to remember things that have happened and to maybe reevaluate them and redefine them. And imagination, of course, is involved into the creation of our future. We imagine the future, we plan the future, we envision possibilities that do not exist, we design, we create. So imagination has its hands into many parts of our life, very direct influence into many parts of our life. And that third part of consciousness, the ability to store information, the ability to process information, the ability to imagine things that do not exist, are the third part of the brain, what we call the neocortex. And again, the official scientific theory tells us that through ages, through millennia and millennia and millennia, we have evolved the reptilian brain and emotional brain, and the top is covered by the blanket of the neocortex, which covers more or less the whole surface below our skull. The neocortex is what we call usually the brain. It's all those functions related with thinking, analyzing, reason, logic, recalling things to project the future, mathematics, economics, literature, politics, a sense of justice. All of that belongs to the educated neocortex, because the neocortex is the part of us that's educated, that goes to school. Values, all the values reference, value judgment belong to the neocortex, and all the functions related to reason, to logic, and to thinking. So there's the action brain, the feeling brain, and the thinking brain, which comes down to those three centers inside our physical system. Below the navel, the action part, the raw energy part, here the feeling part, and here the thinking part. So that's an overview of consciousness. The fourth aspect of consciousness is very specific to us humans. It is the ability to see ourselves. And this is a very interesting ability because we human beings have the ability to project our consciousness outside and to look at ourselves as if we were looking in a mirror. And this is something extremely interesting because it allows us to see ourselves. I don't know if you have ever filmed yourself and seen yourself. It can be a very traumatic experience, it can be a very revealing experience, because suddenly you see that person that you are all the time, and suddenly you see. And it is a very different experience. I remember the first time it happened to me, when I saw how I looked, I was quite surprised. There's something very intriguing into nature, that nature is giving us those eyes and we perceive the world through our eyes, which means we see what's in front of the eyes, we don't see what's behind. It means that we see everything except what's behind, except ourselves, our mind, and our consciousness. I would like to touch briefly on the way those three brains, those three levels of consciousness operate together. So I recap briefly the brain. Reptilian brain, reflex, grasp, kick, run. Emotional brain, senses, feelings. And neocortex, thinking, logic, knowledge, all the power of knowledge in the neocortex. I would like to ask you, which one do you think is the first one that responds when you meet any situation of life, person, situation that comes to you? Which one of those three brains is firing first? Do you first act and then think? We do. Do you first feel to try to get an understanding, a feeling of what's going on? Or do you first think, which means you look back and you analyze, you refer to knowledge, you refer to memory to try to make sense of what's going on and of what you have to do. So of course, every time I ask this question, everyone is telling me it depends on the situation. And of course, in intimate relationship or at the office, you are using different parts of your brain. This is understandable. But there's another aspect also, is that each one of us have a dominant tendency, Some of us are very instinctive people. We kick first and we talk later. Some of us are feeling people. We feel our way through life. And some of us are thinking people. We plan, we organize our way through life. This is personal style. But in terms of the mechanism of consciousness and the mechanism of the brain, the very first brain that responds to any situation is the emotional brain. Which means that the very first question our brains are asking is the question, is it a friend or an enemy? And it makes sense because even if you are operating on reflex, you still need to figure out if it's a friend or an enemy that's in front of you. So the very first question the brain is asking is that question, friend or enemy? Which in terms of feelings, because it is a feeling question, the first question the brain is asking is a feeling question. How does that feel? Does it feel safe or unsafe? Does it feel good or unpleasant? And based on that answer, based on the answer that you in the present moment is giving to that question, then the rest, the two other brains, come into operation. If the answer to that question, how does it feel, is that it feels good, it feels safe, then the emotional brain is sending the information, is connecting to the neocortex, and it activates the whole neocortex. And I'm sure you've experienced that when you are with friends, with people that you love, in a team where there is an extraordinary bonding, when there's a lot of enthusiasm and loyalty and togetherness. You are thinking very clear, you are thinking very, very creatively. You know what you know, your knowledge is active, you're fast, you're sharp, you're clear. And this is in that situation where the emotional brain senses goodness, activates the neocortex, and your whole intellectual potential blossoms, and you can use it. Now, let's take the situation where the emotional brain perceives unpleasant, unsafe, doesn't look like a friend, doesn't feel like a friend. At that moment, two things are happening inside the brain. The first one, the emotional brain is going to trigger the reptilian brain because unsafe situation means I need to go on alert. And it is a good thing. But at the same time, the emotional brain is going to disconnect the neocortex. And the logic is very simple, is that if, again, you go to the bathroom at 3 o'clock in the morning and you find a tiger there, then it's not a good time to think. It's not the right time to analyze and to measure and to try to recall what you read about handling tigers in bathrooms at night. It's time to run, of course. And so the mechanism is designed in that way that in face of the threat, no thinking but action. And it's very good, except for worries, except for complaints, except for all those moments where we do create a feeling of insecurity and we activate exactly the same process inside ourselves. We disempower our brains, we disempower our intelligence simply because we allow ourselves to dwell on feelings of insecurity. We allow ourselves to worry, we allow ourselves to complain, we allow ourselves to imagine that so many terrible things are going to happen very soon. I hope I'm making sense. There are three very interesting consequences of this. The first one is paying attention to our feelings. We mentioned that several times, but when we put paying attention to our feelings in the context of brain work, in the context of how our intelligence is triggered and blossoms, then it really tells us how much we need to care, to cultivate a sense of security, a sense of well-being in our heart. so that we can be in situations that are either friendly or unfriendly, and yet maintain a sense of stability, a sense of pleasantness inside our heart, for the purpose of keeping our whole intellectual potential activated and powerful. This is the first thing. The second thing that we can draw, the second lesson we can draw from that understanding of the mechanics of the brain, is a little slogan that I've made as one of the guidelines of my life, which is friendship first. Friendship first. Which means any situation coming to me, any situation coming to you, any person that you're meeting, challenging or friendly, friendship first. Because two things. First, I need to establish a connection with that situation or with that person. If you have a connection, you have a communication channel. If you have a communication channel, many things are possible. So this is the first benefit of maintaining that strategy of friendship first. The second benefit is obvious. Friendship first means I generate pleasantness inside myself, and therefore I activate my best thinking potential. And by adopting an attitude of friendship, I am sending out a very clear signal to a person or to a situation, a signal that says, do not be afraid. I am not an enemy. I am a friend. I am not coming here to fight. I am not coming here to challenge you. I am not coming here to disturb you. I am coming here and I'm in front of you now. Life has put us in front of each other for the purpose of our mutual benefit, friendship. And when you do this, you, of course, support your good thinking, but you also support the good thinking of the person, because you are not threatening them. And therefore, their own intelligence can blossom. And if we work with the reptilian brain, yes, we're going to fight, that's for sure. But if we can keep our heads going, and if we can keep our intelligence going, we have good chances of understanding each other. So the second aspect, friendship first, in any circumstance. The third aspect is a direct consequence of this. It's how do you apply that awareness that you have about the functioning of your brain and of your consciousness to relationships where you are in authority, like with your children, with your employees. And I would like you to imagine for a moment, to put yourself into the shoes of a, let's say, a 10 years old, who is half your size, a third of your weight, that has very little experience of life, and that has just done a mistake, or that is just struggling to understand something you want him to understand, and you're using threats. You're saying, threats, punishments, blame, criticism. What does criticism, what does threatening, what does punishment feel like? And of course it feels unsafe. And of course it feels threatening. So what are you doing to the brain of that 10 years old? What are you doing to the brain of that employee that is sucking and that you're trying to push? You're blocking it. And we do that on a daily basis. We do that almost constantly because we've been taught to believe that criticism encourages people to improve. And yes, of course, you know, if you threaten someone, if you scare them, if you really criticize them hard, sure they want to improve, definitely. But the problem is that they can't. They can't. Because by criticizing, blaming, threatening, punishing, etc., we lock their brain. And I would like you to really pause for a moment and to imagine what is happening in the heart of a child who is threatened by an adult and therefore wants to understand what he is requested to understand, but can't do it. Can you sense that emotion? Can you sense the intensity of that confusion inside the heart of a child that is threatened to understand something, that wants to understand something, but doesn't have access to his own brain because he's under threat, he's under fear, and he's in a reflex situation where he wants to kick, he wants to run, he wants to It does explain why so many young people are so upset, are so rebel, are so agitated, are so restless in their life. I wanted you to understand this mechanism of the brain. It's something that we have all experienced, exam fear, when you studied your subject, and you come on the day of the examination, and your consciousness perceives that as a very dangerous situation. It's a life-threatening situation. You risk your career, you risk your future. And you know your subject, you've studied, and you sit in front of that topic, and what happens? Nothing. For a little while, blank. And we've all experienced that in situations of stress where we go blank, we do not have access to all the knowledge we've stored in our consciousness. This is the mechanism of the brain, and it tells us why paying attention to that question, am I living from fear or am I living from love, is a very good thing to do. Fear is shrinking us. Fear is a movement of contraction that blocks our energy and it blocks our intelligence. Love is expanding us. It's a movement that outgoes, that goes beyond itself, and it makes our intelligence blossom. It empowers our energy, makes us shine, makes us bloom, makes us enthusiastic and beautiful. And if we can pay attention to that question, right here, right now, am I operating on fear or on love? And we've understood a number of things to shift from fear to love, gratitude being one of the most powerful and very direct keys to remember that gratitude that we feel for being alive. Even if we are in very harsh circumstances, we are still alive, we can still hope, we can still change, we can still make it. And in the next episode, I will take up another aspect of consciousness and of the brain that will make us see why joy is the foundation of very good thinking. Those things are things that we can apply in any area of our life. Love is not just good for our children, for our spouse and boyfriends and girlfriends, but that ability to make the emotional brain feel comfortable and to empower intelligence is applicable in every single area of our life to improve effectiveness, to improve leadership skills, to improve creativity, to improve learning, for everything. Thank you very much for watching. I hope that little video will be useful for you. I hope it will change your life as much as it changed mine. Thank you.